All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jenna Wood, and I am one of the dietitians here with the Giant Company. Today, we are talking all about mindful eating, but a little bit kind of more in depth. We are talking about mindful eating practices because we did touch on mindful eating, the actual 101, in a previous class. So if you missed that, Joni did talk about kind of all of the details, like why mindful eating can be helpful, regardless of what, kind of health journey you're on in a previous class. So we can send the link to that in the recap email too. So you can watch that and then watch tonight's class, again, if you want to do that, because we'll talk a little bit more about how to get yourself there and some other things to think about with mindful eating. Our overview for today, it's kind of all over the place. I wasn't sure. Joni covered a lot of things in her class, and there is one particular activity I think of when I think of mindful eating. So I wanted to kind of talk about some different things. So one, I'm going to touch on why do we eat, which I'm sure you know, but there are lots of reasons we eat. Habits of mindful eaters, the hunger scale, which I know Joni touched on, but I think it's so important that I'm going to talk about it again, and just kind of reminders of when and how to look out for places along that scale in yourself and like how to do it while you're eating. I'm going to touch on intuitive eating because it is a little different than mindful eating. They're similar, but there's some differences that I want to point out. And then we will get to our activity at the very end. Okay, so why do we eat? Of course, we eat for genuine hunger out of a biological need. We have a physiological need for food, for calories. Whether I'm talking to kids or adults alike, I talk about calories being our energy because that's what calories are. They're a unit of energy, and we really need to eat calories to live and to thrive and to do all the things we need to do. So, one of the reasons we eat is out of genuine hunger. And we'll talk about some ways to differentiate if what you're feeling is genuine hunger or not. Then we have psychology, or more what we consider appetite. I will sometimes you'll have an appetite and you'll actually be hungry, but other times you will have an appetite for something and you're not really hungry. This could be related to food preferences, which we can all have food preferences and that's totally fine, but that can go into the psychology of eating, emotional eating, and really eating for any reason other than hunger. So this could be, eating like a Christmas cookie or birthday cake or something like that. You may be genuinely hungry, but more often than not, there are a lot of times in our society where we eat because it's just something we do. And then, of course, there's environment, which I think sometimes is overlooked in these conversations, but we live in a very food-driven environment. Not to say that other parts of the world aren't, but we definitely are. And Shane and I had an event together today and we were talking about food, and because that's what we do. We talk about food. That's what our jobs are all about. But we all have to eat. So it's, very unlike any other part of our lives or things we're trying to control because we have to eat. But there are things out there that also make us want to eat more. So this could be food labeling or marketing or packaging. There are entire degrees out there where people learn how to market food to people and make it look more appetizing. The size of your eating or drinking vessel, kind of concept of supersized meals or, any oversized portions. We eat with our eyes, and often we will eat even if we're served more than we typically eat. We just tend to do that. And atmosphere. So whether it's at home or eating out, this is not a positive or a negative. We want our atmosphere when we're eating to be positive, but there are things out there, especially when it comes to like fast food places, that they've researched certain colors like reds and yellows sometimes make people eat more. Now, of course, there are habits of people who eat more mindfully. We'll touch on some of these, and some of these may be reminders from previous classes. Now, I know this is easier said than done, but one of the best things you can do for yourself when it comes to mindful eating is slowing down. If you're somebody who eats really quickly and feels full really quickly, and especially really full, you should feel pleasantly full after a meal, but you don't want to feel awful after your meal. You don't want it to be a negative association. So you don't want to rush through your meals. Now, there's going to be times where you have to. We all live busy lives, and sometimes you just have to eat a meal quickly. But more often than not, there are going to be times where you do have time to eat. So you need to allot the amount of time that you want. So setting a timer could be something, if you know you want your meal to take at least 20 minutes, maybe set your timer for 30 minutes and kind of watch as your pace, like how quickly am I eating this meal? It's something to work on over time. And certainly some meals are just easier to eat quickly than others, but certainly slowing down is going to be key. One habit that you can work on to help you eat more slowly is chewing your food thoroughly. If you're somebody who just isn't in the habit of chewing food very well, this can be something to work on. And some things out there say we should chew our food 20 times. I don't know if that's exactly how much you should chew each piece of food. Some foods, yes, are going to need more chewing than others, but definitely work on using your mouth as the first step of digestion. Because I think a lot of people who have some GI issues, it starts in our mouths. If we're not properly breaking down that food in our mouth, our stomach's not going to be properly prepared to do the next step of digestion. So you really want to, mastication is the word for it, you really want to use your teeth as they were designed to break down that food before it hits the stomach. So if you're slowing down, you're chewing your food, all of these steps are going to come together. And it might be as simple as, putting yourself like little sticky notes, like writing it down, like slow down, chew your food. Put your utensil down in between bites can be helpful. Eliminating distractions. If you're somebody who watches TV or is reading or doing something while you're eating your meal, it might be time to put away those distractions, especially at the meals you struggle with the most. I don't know. I saw this one on a couple places. They recommended eating in silence. I think with all of the different things we've got going on, this might be a really nice time to have silence. We don't often have a time where we're not connected to something or reading something or looking at something. So eating in silence may help you if you really struggle with slowing down. Eating is the only thing you can really focus on if you're eating in silence. So this can just be one thing to try. Maybe not for every meal, but maybe a big meal, trying eating in silence. And I recommend starting with one meal, one snack. Like, this is not something you're going to probably be able to do at every meal going forward, but it's certainly something that can be worth trying if you tend to overeat or eat too quickly. Now, one thing I think also we don't talk about a lot when it comes to mindful eating is the concept of meal planning. People who mindfully eat are often people who meal plan as well. And I know, this class isn't about meal planning, but I did want to talk about it in the realm of mindful eating and how both can go together. Now, if we're not making a plan, often people skip meals or they wait way too long to eat because they had no plan. And, maybe you're at work or you're at home and you didn't think about what you're going to make for dinner and you already have gotten hungry. You're not going to make a lot of great choices when you're already hungry and you don't have a plan set already for what dinner's going to be. We don't make really good food choices when we're already hungry because there's so much working against us in our brains, in our hormones, that know it just needs energy from calories, and it's going to get it in the most readily available, easy way, which again is often not the most balanced or nutritious. So having a meal plan and a detailed shopping list can really help. And I say help because it's not going to be the only thing you need to try, but it can help prevent those skipped meals and the uncertainty that comes around mealtime, which can lead to more mindless eating. So again, today's presentation is not about meal planning, but we certainly have a lot of recorded classes, and we'll certainly talk about meal planning more in the future too. And I know meal planning can be overwhelming at first, and I don't always meal plan the same way every week, but start with one meal or start with a meal you struggle with. Like maybe it is dinner that you just you never have a plan for and just things get out of hand. Or maybe it's lunch. For a lot of people, it is lunch. So certainly think about what might be the most beneficial to plan and just start there. Now, what about intuitive eating? Intuitive eating is something you may have heard of. It's a newer kind of concept, I would say within the last 10, 15 years. And it's an approach to eating that really emphasizes being in touch with our body's cues and using all of that inherent knowledge and emotions and things to decide how and when to eat foods. Now, intuitive eating, not to say that mindful eating isn't, but mindful eating for a lot of people can be a way to work on weight loss and different health related goals. Intuitive eating, as it is specifically designed, is considered a non diet approach. So it really is not about weight loss or anything like that. It's more so about the relationship we have with food. So, intuitive eating is a non diet approach that was originally designed by two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. And they have a book and a workbook. And it's just a really interesting concept to think about. And I do think mindful eating and intuitive eating overlap in a lot of ways, and you can utilize the concepts from both, but they're not exactly the same concept. Uh, Again, they have overlapping concepts where we're going to think about our senses and we're going to think about our hunger cues. And if we are hungry and if we're not hungry, why are we craving a certain type of food? So it's all about that. But I think one of the biggest pieces in how they're different is that intuitive eating emphasizes the relationship we have with food. And I know that might be a weird word to use when you're talking about food, but we do all have a relationship with food. Whether you want to believe that or not, it is true. And some people have a very positive, healthy relationship with food, and some people don't. And it could be as severe as an eating disorder, or it could just be some disordered eating habits. Some of the things, there's like a 10-step platform when it comes to intuitive eating, and they're all very interesting. But a lot of what they talk about is, again, that relationship and the way we think about our hunger cues and the way we think about foods. And so they really emphasize eliminating this good versus bad thinking when it comes to food. There are no good or bad foods, but we can have really bad relationships with foods that can make us feel bad about ourselves if we eat those foods. Uh, and they talk about avoiding judgment towards your own eating or towards the eating of others. So I think that is a nice kind of part to add to it, mindful eating, especially if you're somebody who has struggled with disordered eating in the past. This is just a nice kind of concept to kind of throw in there of, you know, you kind of will be looking at your dietary habits almost from an outsider perspective of, I want to, gather information about why I eat the foods I do or why I don't eat certain foods. And we're not looking at it as a judgment. We just want to learn more and maybe work on that relationship we have with food. But there's a lot more information out there about intuitive eating. If you're interested, again, they have a workbook and things like that. If you're a workbook person, that can really be helpful. Now, as I mentioned, they have the food scale. So, like, how do I know if I'm hungry? So, the hunger scale, and this one is from the Children's Physician Medical Group, but you can see a lot of examples online. But I really like the hunger scale, again, for people who struggle with, am I hungry, or eating when they're not hungry, or getting too full. This is something really nice to have a visual of, either on your phone or print it out, because you can kind of gauge, all right, where am I on the spectrum right now? And sometimes, and this goes back to the intuitive eating piece, mindful eating would just tell you, if you're at 6 or 5, you really shouldn't be eating or you shouldn't start a new meal. But intuitive eating might tell you, okay, maybe you don't feel hungry right now, but you're going to have to go a long, long time before your next meal. Maybe you're traveling or you have work commitments or something. Intuitive eating might tell you, I'm still going to eat something maybe small and balanced right now, even though I'm not, the 3, 4 I should be. I'm going to eat something to prevent me from getting super hungry because I know I'm going to have to wait longer. So I kind of like using the food scale with that intuitive piece in mind. Like, I'm not going to judge the fact that I'm not hungry, but I'm going to eat something because there's a purpose. Now, in general, before you start eating a meal or a snack, I recommend taking a pause, taking a deep breath, kind of focusing on the meal itself and not all the other things we got going on, and sit down and actually rate your hunger. Look at where it might fall on the map. We do recommend you start eating between a 3 and a 4. So you're going to feel some physical, most people are going to feel some type of physical symptom when it relates to real hunger. So this could be your stomach growling. It could be um, like a preoccupation with food, like you are so preoccupied with thinking about food. And again, sometimes you might be thinking about food because you're watching our classes or you're watching a TV show or you're in the mall and you smell Cinnabon or whatever it is. There are a lot of reasons you might think you feel hungry, but really think about it. So you might be thinking about food, your stomach might growl, you might be a little just, you can't concentrate on anything. You might get a slight headache. I will say those type of symptoms, you're starting to near the uncomfortably hungry. You don't want your blood sugar to really dip. We kind of just want to start eating really when you start feeling those symptoms. Halfway through your meal, let's, assume you portioned yourself a really nice portion of food. It looks great. You're eating halfway through that meal. You're going to stop and you're going to check in with yourself. Am I still hungry? More often than not, the answer is going to be yes, I am still hungry. It typically takes roughly 20 minutes to get those, signals and hormones telling our brains that we're full. But ask yourself, am I still hungry? Yes, but start slowing down after that point where you've, stopped to reassess. Start really slowing down at that point because it's taking your brain time to catch up with your stomach and you don't want to miss any of those cues. Additionally, if you are completely distracted from the food now, like you're starting to think about other things you need to do, you really want to, turn the TV back on or you want to do something, if you really are disinterested in the food, you're likely not hungry anymore. And that can be a great time to stop eating. So again, stop eating when you're satisfied, but not overly full. You want to just feel content. Because if you stop eating beyond that point, that's when we start to get to like, I feel overly full, my pants don't fit well, all of that. So 6, you still feel light, you feel satisfied, but you don't even necessarily have that sensation of being full. Now, I started to allude to the differences between hunger and all the different types of appetite, but I want to kind of lay them out in a chart form. So there's different types of eating. We're going to talk about what to look for and how to respond to it. And again, this is where mindful eating and intuitive eating kind of overlap because mindful eating might tell you one thing, but intuitive eating might tell you another. And you get to decide for yourself what makes the most sense for you. So first, of course, we have that true, genuine hunger. Often, this is a gradual onset. Of course, it can depend on a lot of physiological factors. It can depend on what you ate in your last meal. If you ate a really processed meal, or maybe something that doesn't have a lot of fiber, protein, or healthy fats, you might be hungry really quickly. It might feel more quick, or than you expected it to. But more likely than not, genuine hunger, it takes some time to grow. You're going to have those physical symptoms we mentioned, the growling stomach, low energy. And at that point, likely any food would satisfy hunger. And that's just kind of one of the ways to differentiate between them. However, of course, we talked about meal planning. You likely and hopefully will have something really balanced planned. And that's how you'll respond. You'll eat that balanced meal or snack that you have planned. Because we're not going to get to the point where we're so ravenous and hungry that we'll eat whatever's in front of us. We want to get to that 3 and eat them. So that's true, genuine hunger. Then you might have cravings. We all have cravings at some point. But this craving is so it's a sudden onset or desire for a specific type of food. It's often a food that is either really calorically dense or it's really sweet or it might be savory. It tends to have a lot of fat. There's a lot of foods we crave. Not a lot of people are out there craving broccoli. I love broccoli. It's not something I crave all the time. So it could be something like chocolate, candy, soda, chips, lots of things. Now, there's different ways to respond to this, and you get to decide. So I want you to pause, like with any eating occasion, take a pause, decide if you are actually genuinely hungry, because you may be craving something and actually be hungry too. If that's the case, have whatever meal or balanced snack that you have planned or prepared, or order something or whatever it happens to be if you're not prepared, and think, will that satisfy me? Great. If not, can I also incorporate the craving that I had into the meal? Because a lot of times what you'll see people do, especially online, they'll talk about like, oh, if you are craving chocolate, try to eat something else that's sweet, like an apple. And then you eat something else, and then you eat something else, and then you still eat the chocolate later. And now you've eaten a lot of things when you could have just eaten the chocolate and maybe nothing else. Or if you were genuinely hungry, you had a real meal and then maybe a small portion of the chocolate. So you really need to assess what's going to satisfy real hunger and the craving. So if you're not actually hungry, and this is where the intuitive eating piece comes in, we're not going to pass judgment if you take a breath, you regroup. And if you still really want the food that you're craving, we're not going to have a judgment about that. We're human. We like food. Food, satisfies many things. So decide if you still want to have that craving food, but your aim is to eat it mindfully and a small portion of it. And you're going to enjoy it. And that's the biggest piece too. We should enjoy foods always. But we want to eat it mindfully so that we're not just inhaling it and not enjoying the actual aspect of eating. The mindful eating activity we'll do at the end, that's what I want you to do when you have those cravings, because there's room in all of our diets for things like chips and chocolate and ice cream, but often there's room for a smaller portion. And if you eat it mindfully, you're going to be satisfied with a way smaller portion than you would have initially thought. And then, of course, we have emotional eating, which can be tied into cravings, certainly, but this is typically driven by stress, boredom, sadness, habit. Sometimes we eat out of habit. Now, with this, I do recommend, again, taking a pause, taking a very deep breath, maybe a couple deep breaths, and check your emotions before eating. Because, again, you may still decide to eat, and that is perfectly okay. But if it is, you're just eating out of boredom, maybe, or you're eating because you're sad, or you're eating because you're stressed. Some people don't eat when they're stressed, so it could go both ways. But think through, what other activity would satisfy this emotion that I'm having? Because it's not a craving for a specific food. It's more like a habit, just something you do. What else could satisfy this? Could I take a walk? Could I read a book? Could I do something? Often something with my hands tends to be something that'll just break it. 5, 10, 15 seconds sometimes is enough to break that habit. And once you're out of the habit, we often don't turn to food for the first time. All right, so I think I have a couple more slides and then we're going to get to our activity. But I did want to touch on this because this is something, especially as we learn more and more about these GLP-1 medications, like you learned about in class earlier today. There's a lot of things that can affect our appetite. And again, this is why I wanted to mention the intuitive eating piece, because there are some people who can't always listen to their hunger and fullness cues. Now, appetite, as I kind of alluded to, is the desire to eat food. And appetite can come from cravings, or it can come from genuine hunger too. And appetite, it involves a lot of parts of our bodies, not just our stomachs. So it does, involve our digestive system, but it also affects our endocrine system because there are various hormones that go into whether we're hungry, whether we're full, whether, how our blood sugars are controlled after eating, and then our nervous system as well. There are lots of hormones, but there are two main hormones, at least I think of when it comes to our appetite. We have ghrelin and leptin, and they play a huge role in hunger and appetite or satiety. Ghrelin, and I remember from college when we're learning all these hormones for the first time, ghrelin has that grr sound at the beginning. So grr, like your stomach's growling, is what we call the hunger hormone. This helps stimulate our appetite in our brains. And it tells us one of the many things that, triggers your brain to be like, oh, wait, I'm hungry. Leptin, on the other hand, helps let our brains know when we're full. There is such thing as leptin resistance where we don't have enough leptin telling us that we're full. So sometimes, especially people who carry a little bit more adipose or fat tissue, sometimes they don't have enough of this hormone telling them that they're full. So they do genuinely feel hungry all the time. And this is one of the things that GLP-1 medications may help with, not necessarily these hormones. Sometimes they work with some others. It can help slow the emptying of our stomach, which can help people stay fuller longer. So there are genuinely people who their hormones, their biology is working against them, and they do genuinely feel hungry or they don't feel satisfied after meals. So these people can have a difficult time being in tune with those hunger and fullness cues, and no amount of reading that food chart is going to be helpful. So there are health conditions, there are medications, stress and depression, like I've mentioned, weight. So again, depending on how much adipose tissue you might carry, and so many other factors can really affect our appetite and our hunger. Health conditions can be things like different thyroid disorders. On one end of the spectrum, people are hungry all the time. On the other end of the spectrum, people aren't very hungry. Or medications. If you've ever taken a corticosteroid, something like prednisone, it can sometimes make you feel ravenous and you're hungry all the time. And it has to do with a lot of the different hormones that are affected when we take certain medications. And again, certainly this is something, your doctor or somebody would be weighing the pros and cons of taking a medication. Now, of course, if you're somebody who really struggles with your hunger and fullness cues, maybe you think some of this might be at play, this is certainly a conversation to have with a healthcare provider, with a health professional, because there may be something you can do about it. There may be therapy, different things that you can work on to try to be able to listen better to your hunger and fullness cues, or maybe decipher if there's something wrong with some of those hormones. So for a lot of people, it's much more complicated. All right, so that was the last of my slides, and we do have just enough time to do our mindful eating activity. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pull up my script. So right now, I do recommend having your food item, whatever it happens to be. I will say my script does mention chocolate, so I'm going to say chocolate. So if you have a different food item, when I say chocolate, think of that food. All right. You can either not look at the camera anymore or look at the computer, but you're going to focus on the food itself. Now, keep an open mind. Listen to the script. It's going to feel longer than you want it to. You're going to want to eat the food immediately. Definitely listen, because I think this is something that can be helpful. All right. So try and keep quiet during this exercise and focus all of your attention on the chocolate. Approach this exercise with an open mind and gentle curiosity. Now pick up your wrapped chocolate, but don't unwrap it yet. Place it in the palm of your hand and notice the colors and shapes on the package. Feel the weight of it in your hand. Pretend like you've never seen a wrapped piece of chocolate before. Examine it closely. Touching the packaging with your fingers and feel the texture. Pay attention to any sound that the wrapper makes. Examine the wrapper, noticing all of the colors. Look at the different sides of the chocolate, the wrapper. Notice any place that the light reflects off the package, any shadows. If your mind starts to wander and think of other things, that's okay. Notice those thoughts, but bring your attention back to the chocolate. Now, begin to slowly unwrap the chocolate. Listen for the sounds of the wrapper tearing. Notice the movement of your hand, your fingers, and your arm muscles as you open the chocolate. You may hear other people or other noises in the room. Notice those sounds, but bring your attention back to your chocolate. Raise the chocolate to your nose and smell the chocolate. Slowly breathe in several times and focus on the different smells you notice. Does smelling the chocolate trigger anything else in your body? Is your mouth watering? Are you having any thoughts such as, hurry up and please let me eat the chocolate? What's taking so long? If so, notice those thoughts and bring your attention back to just smelling the chocolate. Now, slowly take a small bite of the chocolate, but do not chew or swallow it yet. Notice the feeling and taste of the chocolate in your mouth. How does it feel as it melts? Notice the taste and the sensations of the chocolate on your tongue. Move the chocolate around in your mouth. Try to notice the moment where you feel like you want to swallow. Now slowly swallow the chocolate, focusing on those sensations. Notice any lingering taste or sensations. Right. Yeah, this exercise could be for a lot of things. What did we think? And yes, I'm sorry if you had a food other than chocolate. I have done this in in-person presentations before. I've done it with cheese. I've done it with fruit. I've done it with crackers. You really can do it with just chips. You can do it with anything. But I'd love to hear, especially for those who did the chocolate, what did you notice about the chocolate itself? Did it taste really good? Did you find yourself immediately craving another piece that you were gonna pop in your mouth? Um, oh my goodness, someone says, "I could have used this when I used to test new products for Hershey." We're gonna have to learn more about that. That sounds really fun. Uh, but yeah, I think you couldn't wait to eat more. So it doesn't work for everybody. Um, so yes, so that is the idea, is that eating slowly like this, especially a food you tend to overeat or that we all tend to overeat because it's sweet or it really tastes good, it tends to help us slow down and be satisfied with less. And that's the idea. If you're really engaged and enjoying the food that you're eating, again, we're going to think from a non judgmental perspective. You might still want more, and that is okay. But if it can, even some of the times you're eating these foods, help you slow down and eat less, that's amazing. Or just if it helps you enjoy the food more, that's a win in itself too. If you're gonna eat foods like chocolate or ice cream or all of the things we're talking about in the chat, you should enjoy it. I think that's, goes without saying. But I really appreciate you joining me tonight, learning more about how to actually incorporate mindful eating into your practice. If you want to rewatch the video and listen to the recording for the script, you certainly can do that too. You can also Google. I couldn't find where this particular script came from because I've been using it for like over a decade. But if you look up mindful eating chocolate script, it is something you can find out there online. But I thank you and I hope you have a wonderful evening.